There is a strange exhaustion spreading silently across the modern world. It is not only physical tiredness. It is something deeper, something heavier, something that sleep alone cannot heal. People wake up already anxious. Before their feet even touch the floor, their minds are racing. Notifications flash across the screen. Emails wait to be answered. Messages demand attention. Schedules are already overflowing before the day truly begins. Even moments that once belonged to silence are now invaded by noise, stimulation, urgency, and pressure. Humanity has become trapped in a civilization that no longer knows how to rest. We live in an age where productivity has become a form of religion. The modern person is taught from childhood that their worth depends on achievement. If you produce more, earn more, optimize more, improve more, then you are considered successful. But if you stop, if you slow down, if you rest too long, society quietly whispers that you are falling behind. Rest is treated almost like a weakness. Stillness becomes suspicious. Silence feels uncomfortable. Doing nothing feels like failure. And so people continue running, even when they no longer remember where they are going. The tragedy is that this endless movement is often celebrated. Busyness has become a badge of honor. Exhaustion is worn like proof of importance. People proudly say, "I'm so busy," as if suffering under constant pressure gives meaning to existence. Entire industries are built around helping people become faster, more efficient, more optimized versions of themselves. Even rest itself has been turned into another productivity tool. People are told to meditate so they can work harder, sleep better so they can produce more, exercise more so they can remain competitive. Even spirituality is slowly being consumed by the machinery of self-improvement. But beneath all of this movement, something sacred is being lost. The human spirit was not designed to live in endless acceleration. The mind cannot remain healthy when it never stops grasping. The heart cannot know peace when it is constantly comparing, chasing, consuming, and performing. And yet modern consumer culture survives by keeping people psychologically restless. Because a restless mind is easier to sell to. A restless person always feels incomplete. They always need another purchase, another achievement, another experience, another identity. The economy of craving depends upon the inability to rest deeply. This is why even moments of leisure no longer bring true relief. A person may leave work, but their mind continues spinning. They may sit on a couch scrolling endlessly through videos, advertisements, arguments, and images, but internally the agitation never stops. The body appears inactive, yet the mind remains trapped in movement. Modern entertainment often does not calm the mind, it merely distracts it from noticing its own exhaustion. The Buddha understood this suffering long before the modern world existed. In the teachings of the Dhamma, one of the great obstacles to liberation is restlessness, the agitated mind that cannot settle into stillness. In Pali, this is called adhaka, the state of inner turbulence that keeps consciousness constantly disturbed. The Buddha saw clearly that human beings are driven by craving, by the endless urge to become something else, to reach somewhere else, to acquire something more. This craving does not only appear as greed for material things. It also appears as the obsession with becoming successful, becoming admired, becoming important, becoming complete. Modern society has transformed this craving into a permanent lifestyle. People are rarely allowed to simply exist. Everywhere there is pressure to improve, pressure to compete, pressure to upgrade oneself endlessly. Social media intensifies this suffering by turning life into a continuous performance. Every moment becomes content. Every achievement becomes public comparison. Every silence feels like disappearance. And gradually, people lose contact with the simple experience of being alive without needing to prove anything. This is why many people feel strangely empty, even after accomplishing what they once desired. They reach goals only to discover another goal waiting immediately behind it. They buy what they wanted, yet satisfaction fades quickly. They fill their schedules, yet feel internally hollow. The modern world promises fulfillment through constant doing, but the more humanity chases stimulation, the more exhausted the collective mind becomes. And perhaps the most frightening part is this: many people no longer know how to stop. If you ask someone today to sit alone in silence for 10 minutes without touching their phone, many feel discomfort almost immediately. The mind becomes restless. Anxiety surfaces. Thoughts rush in. There is an urge to escape into stimulation again. This reveals something profound. The addiction is not merely to technology or work. The addiction is to distraction itself. Constant doing protects people from encountering the deeper uneasiness within their own minds. But the Dhamma points toward another possibility. The Buddha never taught that human life should revolve around endless production. He did not teach that value comes from achievement. Again and again, he pointed toward simplicity, stillness, mindfulness, and release from craving. In the forests where monks practiced beneath quiet trees, there was no obsession with personal branding, optimization, or endless consumption. There was space to breathe, space to observe, space to be fully present without needing to become something else. True rest, from the perspective of the Dhamma, is not laziness. It is not irresponsibility. It is not escapism. Real rest is sacred because it interrupts the machinery of craving. It allows the mind to step outside the endless cycle of wanting, consuming, and becoming. In genuine stillness, a person begins to rediscover something the modern world has nearly forgotten. That existence itself does not need constant justification. You do not have to earn every moment of peace. You do not need to prove your worth through exhaustion. And perhaps one of the greatest acts of spiritual resistance in this age of relentless productivity is simply this: to stop, to breathe, and to remember that beneath all the noise, the mind was always longing for rest. But if humanity has forgotten how to rest, then an even deeper question must be asked: what does true rest actually mean? Most people assume rest simply means stopping work, sleeping longer, taking vacations, or distracting themselves with entertainment. Yet if this were true, modern society would already be deeply rested. Never before in history have people had so many forms of entertainment, convenience, and stimulation available at every moment. And yet anxiety continues to rise. Burnout continues to spread. Loneliness deepens. The mind remains exhausted. This reveals something important. Most modern forms of rest are not truly rest at all. A person may lie in bed for hours scrolling endlessly through social media, but internally the mind is still agitated. Another may binge-watch entire seasons of shows to escape stress, but when the distraction ends, the uneasiness returns. Some people shop compulsively to feel temporary relief. Others travel constantly, searching for peace in new places. But no matter how far they go, the restless mind follows them. The body may pause, but psychologically the movement never stops. Craving continues. Comparison continues. Mental noise continues. The fire inside the mind keeps burning. This is why the Dhamma offers a radically different understanding of rest. In Buddhist teaching, true rest does not merely mean physical inactivity. True rest means the calming of craving itself. It means the temporary ending of compulsive becoming. It means the mind no longer struggling against the present moment. Real rest begins when the heart stops running. The Buddha often spoke about suffering not as something imposed from outside, but as something generated internally through attachment, resistance, and craving. The exhausted mind is not only tired because it works too much. It is tired because it never stops grasping. Even while resting, it continues wanting something else. Wanting more stimulation, more pleasure, more certainty, more validation, more identity. The mind is constantly leaning toward the next thing, unable to settle into simple presence. And this is why modern entertainment often fails to heal the soul. Distraction is not the same as peace. Consumption is not the same as restoration. In fact, endless stimulation can deepen exhaustion because the nervous system never truly settles. The mind becomes addicted to movement. Silence begins to feel uncomfortable because silence reveals the turbulence we have been avoiding. But the Buddha pointed toward another way entirely. In the Dhamma, there is a beautiful concept called passaddhi, which means tranquility or calming. It refers to the deep settling of both body and mind. This tranquility does not arise from possessing more things or achieving more goals. It arises when grasping begins to soften. When craving weakens, the entire being becomes lighter. There is less inner friction, less psychological noise, less pressure to become someone else. Another profound Buddhist teaching is Nibbāna, often translated as renunciation. But modern people frequently misunderstand renunciation as deprivation or loss. In reality, the Buddha described renunciation as relief. Imagine carrying a heavy burden for years without realizing how exhausted you have become. Then suddenly you put it down. That moment of release is the spirit of Nibbāna. The Dhamma teaches that much of human suffering comes from the endless burden of craving, identity, ambition, and attachment. To let go, even briefly, is not punishment. It is rest. This completely reverses the values of consumer culture. Modern society says, acquire more, become more, experience more, and then you will finally rest. But the Dhamma says, the more you cling, the more restless you become. Consumer culture treats rest as a way to recharge productivity. Rest is allowed only so you can return to work stronger, faster, and more efficient. Even vacations become performances. People travel not to be still, but to create content, display experiences, and maintain identities. Everything becomes part of the cycle of doing. The Dhamma offers something far more radical, the possibility that your worth never depended on productivity in the first place. This is difficult for many people to accept because modern identity is deeply tied to achievement. People often do not know who they are without their roles, goals, and constant activity. If the movement stops, fear arises. Without productivity, they fear becoming invisible or meaningless. But the Buddha repeatedly pointed beyond this illusion. He taught that peace does not come from constructing a perfected self. Peace comes from loosening attachment to the endless project of self-construction altogether. This is why some of the most peaceful images in Buddhist tradition are astonishingly simple. A monk sitting quietly beneath a tree. A bowl of food eaten mindfully in silence. The sound of wind moving through a forest monastery. No urgency. No competition. No performance. Just awareness fully present with reality as it is. In those moments, rest is no longer something earned through exhaustion. It becomes a natural expression of non-grasping. And perhaps this is what the modern world has forgotten most deeply. The human being does not need to justify existence through constant motion. There is profound dignity in stillness. There is wisdom in silence. There is healing in stepping outside the machinery of endless consumption and remembering how to simply breathe, observe, and be. The practice of mindfulness, or sati, points directly toward this rediscovery. True mindfulness is not another productivity technique. It is not about optimizing performance. It is about awakening from compulsive mental movement. It is the ability to rest attention fully in the present moment without constantly reaching elsewhere. When mindful awareness deepens, even ordinary experiences become sacred again. Drinking tea, walking slowly, feeling the breath enter and leave the body, listening to rain without needing distraction. These simple moments contain a kind of peace that consumer culture cannot sell because they require nothing extra to complete them. The restless world says, do more, become more, consume more. But the Dhamma whispers something entirely different. It says that perhaps the deepest peace is found not in adding more to the self, but in finally allowing the endless striving to become quiet. If true rest is so healing, so natural, and so necessary for the human spirit, then why do so many people fear it? Why does stillness feel uncomfortable to the modern mind? Why do people instinctively reach for their phones the moment silence appears? Why do so many feel anxious when there is nothing to do? Because stillness is dangerous to the ego. The modern world often treats busyness as normal, but beneath the surface, constant activity has become a form of escape. Many people are not staying busy because life genuinely requires endless movement. They are staying busy because silence forces them to encounter themselves. And for a mind conditioned by distraction, this encounter can feel unbearable. The moment external stimulation disappears, unresolved emotions begin to surface. Loneliness appears. Anxiety emerges. Regret rises quietly from beneath consciousness. Questions long avoided suddenly return. Fear of aging. Fear of death. Fear of meaninglessness. Fear of emptiness. The noise of modern life often functions like a shield protecting people from seeing the deeper instability within the mind. This is why many people cannot simply sit quietly in a room without needing distraction. The silence feels too exposed. The mind immediately searches for escape: music, videos, messages, work, shopping, entertainment, conversation. Anything to avoid direct contact with the raw experience of being alive. Constant doing becomes a psychological anesthetic. The Buddha understood this deeply. In the Dhamma, craving is not limited to desire for pleasure or material possessions. Craving also manifests as the endless urge to become. The urge to build identity. To construct significance. To constantly reinforce the feeling of, I am somebody. This is known as bhavata, the craving for becoming. Modern civilization is built almost entirely upon this craving. From childhood, people are taught to construct themselves endlessly. Build your future. Build your status. Build your image. Build your personal brand. Build your success story. Even suffering is often turned into identity. Every moment becomes part of the project of becoming someone important, someone admired, someone complete. But the tragedy is this: the self that people are desperately trying to complete is never stable to begin with. The Buddha taught anatta, the absence of a permanent, unchanging self. What people call me is actually a constantly changing process of thoughts, emotions, memories, sensations, perceptions, and conditions arising and passing away moment by moment. Yet the ego resists this truth. It wants solidity. It wants permanence. It wants to feel secure through identity. And so it keeps moving endlessly, trying to strengthen itself through achievement, recognition, and control. This endless self-construction creates profound exhaustion. A person wakes up and immediately begins maintaining identities. Professional identity. Social identity. Digital identity. Family identity. Political identity. Spiritual identity. Every platform demands performance. Every interaction subtly pressures the individual to present a version of themselves. The mind rarely rests because the ego feels constantly threatened by disappearance. If it stops producing, stops posting, stops achieving, it fears becoming invisible. And so modern people become trapped in a cycle of perpetual motion. They check notifications before fully waking. Their minds jump from task to task all day long. Even during meals, attention remains fragmented. There is always another email, another update, another comparison, another demand waiting. Many people no longer experience uninterrupted presence. They live in continuous partial attention, where the nervous system never fully relaxes. Even moments that appear restful are often saturated with subtle anxiety. A person may sit at home watching entertainment, but internally they are still comparing themselves to others online. Still worrying about the future. Still fearing they are not enough. The body stops moving, but the machinery of becoming continues spinning relentlessly inside the mind. This is why burnout has become so widespread in modern society. People are not merely tired from physical labor. They are exhausted from carrying the psychological burden of constantly manufacturing themselves. The mind was never designed to sustain this level of stimulation, comparison, and self-monitoring indefinitely. Yet society continues rewarding this sickness. People who sacrifice sleep for work are praised. Those who constantly hustle are admired. Overwork becomes virtue. Slowing down appears irresponsible. Silence appears unproductive. A person sitting quietly beneath a tree may seem lazy in the eyes of a civilization addicted to movement. But from the perspective of the Dhamma, that quiet person may actually be closer to sanity than the restless masses endlessly chasing stimulation. Because a restless civilization cannot hear truth clearly. The Dhamma requires stillness. Not because Buddhism worships passivity, but because wisdom cannot penetrate a constantly agitated mind. If the surface of a lake is violently disturbed, it cannot reflect anything clearly. In the same way, when the mind is continuously consumed by distraction, craving, and noise, it loses the ability to see reality deeply. This is why the Buddha repeatedly withdrew into silence. Not as escape from life, but as a return to direct seeing. Silence reveals things that noise hides. Stillness exposes the mechanisms of craving. When external distractions fade, people begin noticing how compulsively the mind reaches, grasps, fears, and resists. At first this can feel uncomfortable. Many people abandon silence quickly because they encounter the turbulence they have spent years avoiding. But if one remains present long enough, something remarkable begins to happen. Beneath the restlessness, beneath the noise, beneath the endless movement of thought, there is another possibility. A quieter awareness starts emerging. The compulsion to constantly become begins softening. The pressure to perform weakens. For brief moments, the mind experiences what it feels like to simply exist without needing to prove itself. And in those moments, one begins to understand something profound. The addiction to constant doing was never creating peace. It was only postponing the encounter with inner emptiness. The Dhamma does not ask people to hate activity or abandon responsibility. Rather, it asks a far more radical question: can you act without being psychologically enslaved by endless becoming? Can you work without losing your soul in productivity? Can you participate in life without constantly escaping yourself through noise and distraction? Because ultimately, the deepest danger of a restless society is not exhaustion alone. It is that people may spend their entire lives moving endlessly, without ever truly arriving within themselves. So how do we reclaim rest in a civilization that has forgotten how to stop? How do we rediscover stillness when the entire structure of modern life pushes the mind toward endless movement? The answer may begin with something ancient, something sacred that many traditions once understood deeply: the practice of intentional stopping. Long before the modern obsession with productivity, many spiritual traditions protected periods of rest as holy. The idea of Sabbath was never merely about taking a break from labor. At its deepest level, it was a spiritual interruption of the endless human tendency to consume, control, and produce. It was a sacred pause reminding people that life is more than economic output. For one moment, human beings were invited to step outside the machinery of survival and remember the deeper dimension of existence. In many ways, the Dhamma carries this same spirit. The Buddha consistently encouraged practices that interrupted compulsive activity and returned the mind to awareness. Forest monks lived with extraordinary simplicity, not because simplicity was fashionable, but because excessive stimulation clouds the mind. Monastic discipline created space for silence, mindfulness, contemplation, and direct observation of reality. Even the practice of vipassana, days dedicated to deeper spiritual reflection and restraint, reveals that intentional pause has always been central to liberation. The modern world desperately needs this wisdom again. Today, many people cannot stop because they fear what will happen if they do. If the phone becomes silent, anxiety appears. If the schedule opens, loneliness surfaces. If there is no productivity, the ego begins questioning its own value. This is why reclaiming sacred rest is not easy. It requires courage. It means refusing the unconscious momentum of society. It means stepping outside the addiction to stimulation long enough to hear the deeper condition of one's own mind. But this reclamation does not require abandoning ordinary life. The Dhamma of rest begins with small acts of conscious interruption. One of the simplest and most powerful practices is creating moments completely free from technology and stimulation. Even a single hour without screens can reveal how conditioned the modern mind has become. At first, restlessness intensifies. The hand reaches automatically toward distraction. The mind searches for noise. But if one remains present through this discomfort, something begins softening. The nervous system gradually slows. Attention deepens. The world starts feeling real again. A person begins hearing sounds they normally ignore. Wind moving through trees. Birds in the distance. The rhythm of breathing. The subtle feeling of sunlight touching the skin. These ordinary experiences seem insignificant to the distracted mind, yet they contain an intimacy with life that constant stimulation destroys. The Buddha often taught mindfulness through extremely simple acts. Walking slowly, sitting quietly, breathing consciously, eating attentively. These practices may appear ordinary, but they are revolutionary in a culture addicted to speed. To walk without rushing toward a destination is already an act of resistance. To drink tea without multitasking is an act of reclaiming presence. To sit silently without needing entertainment is an act of freedom. This is because sacred rest is not merely the absence of work. It is the absence of compulsion. A person can be physically inactive while internally consumed by craving, comparison, and mental noise. But another person may be engaged in simple activity while inwardly peaceful and unburdened. The difference is not external movement. The difference is whether the mind is trapped in endless psychological becoming. Breathing meditation reveals this directly. When someone sits quietly and simply observes the breath, nothing dramatic is happening. There is no achievement, no status, no performance. The practice has no audience. And yet this simplicity is precisely why it is transformative. The breath invites the mind out of its obsession with past and future and returns awareness to immediate experience. Each inhalation says, "Be here." Each exhalation says, "Nothing else is required in this moment." For many people, this feels strangely unfamiliar because modern culture trains the mind to constantly anticipate what comes next. Rarely are people taught how to fully inhabit the present without trying to improve it. Even relaxation becomes another project to accomplish correctly. But the Dhamma points toward a completely different orientation toward life. It teaches that peace is not manufactured through endless striving. Peace emerges naturally when striving temporarily ceases. This also means questioning one of the deepest assumptions of modern society, that human worth depends upon productivity. From childhood, people absorb the belief that they must justify their existence through achievement. If they are useful, successful, admired, or productive, then they deserve rest. But if they slow down too much, guilt appears. Yet nowhere in nature does existence need such justification. Trees do not apologize for standing still. Mountains do not prove their worth through efficiency. Rivers do not compare themselves to other rivers. Only the conditioned human ego lives under the constant pressure to become enough. The Dhamma gently invites people out of this prison. You are allowed to rest before the world declares you worthy of it. You are allowed to breathe without earning the right to breathe. You are allowed to exist without transforming every moment into productivity. This realization is profoundly healing because much of modern exhaustion comes not from activity itself, but from the inner violence of constant self-measurement. The mind continuously asks, "Am I doing enough? Am I successful enough? Am I falling behind?" This psychological pressure quietly drains the spirit over time. But when the compulsion to constantly evaluate oneself weakens, a different kind of spaciousness appears. Simplicity becomes nourishing again. Silence becomes restorative instead of frightening. Ordinary moments regain depth and beauty. And perhaps most importantly, one begins to see that rest itself can become a form of spiritual resistance. In a culture designed to intensify craving, choosing stillness interrupts the cycle. In a world profiting from distraction, mindful presence becomes revolutionary. In a civilization addicted to endless consumption, contentment becomes an act of liberation. The Buddha never promised that external life would always become easy or peaceful. But he did point toward freedom from the internal machinery that endlessly turns life into struggle. And that freedom begins in very quiet ways. A mindful breath. A silent morning. A walk without urgency. A moment of simply sitting beneath the sky without needing to become anyone else. These small pauses may appear insignificant in the eyes of the world. But spiritually, they are immense. Because every moment of genuine stillness weakens the illusion that human beings must constantly run in order to matter. And perhaps this is the true meaning of sacred rest, not escaping life, but finally returning fully to it. At the deepest level, the human being is not merely tired from work, responsibilities, or overstimulation. The deepest exhaustion comes from something far more subtle and ancient. It comes from the endless effort of becoming. The endless attempt to construct, defend, improve, and preserve the idea of me. From the moment people wake up, this process begins almost automatically. Thoughts arise about who they are, what they must accomplish, how others perceive them, what they fear losing, what they still need in order to finally feel complete. The mind constantly moves toward the future, trying to secure itself through achievement, control, identity, and permanence. And because all conditioned things are unstable, this struggle never truly ends. The self keeps rebuilding itself again and again, like a fire constantly searching for more fuel. This is why the Buddha described existence as burning. Burning with craving. Burning with attachment. Burning with restlessness. Burning with becoming. And perhaps for this reason, one of the most profound descriptions of Nibbāna is not excitement, ecstasy, or eternal stimulation. It is cooling. The extinguishing of fire. The ending of compulsive grasping. The great rest of the heart. This is difficult for the modern world to understand because contemporary culture is built almost entirely upon stimulation and self-expansion. People are taught that fulfillment comes from becoming more successful, more admired, more optimized, more influential, more spiritually advanced even. But the Buddha pointed in the opposite direction. He did not teach endless self-improvement as the final goal. He taught liberation from the endless burden of self-construction itself. The modern mind hears this and sometimes becomes afraid. It imagines emptiness as loss. It assumes that letting go means becoming passive, lifeless, or detached from humanity. But the peace of the Dhamma is not deadness. It is freedom from unnecessary suffering. It is the profound relief that arises when the mind no longer needs to constantly struggle against reality. Imagine, for a moment, what it would feel like to stop carrying the psychological weight of becoming someone. No longer trying to prove your worth every day. No longer measuring yourself against others. No longer fearing that you are falling behind. No longer needing constant validation to feel real. No longer constructing identity out of every success and failure. No longer running endlessly toward an imagined future where peace finally begins. The Buddha discovered that this freedom is possible. Not through acquiring more, but through seeing clearly. Seeing the impermanence of all experiences. Seeing the instability of identity. Seeing the suffering hidden inside craving. Seeing that the self people are desperately trying to perfect is itself a conditioned process arising and passing moment by moment. And in that seeing, something extraordinary begins to relax. The grasping weakens. The inner pressure softens. The endless movement slows. This is why the Dhamma of rest ultimately points beyond temporary relaxation. It points toward liberation itself. Every moment of genuine stillness becomes a small taste of release from compulsive becoming. Every mindful breath interrupts the machinery of craving. Every act of conscious presence weakens the illusion that happiness exists somewhere outside this moment. The world teaches people to run endlessly. The Dhamma teaches them how to stop. And stopping, in the deepest spiritual sense, is not failure. It is awakening from unconscious momentum. When the Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree, he was not trying to optimize himself. He was not chasing status, wealth, or recognition. He sat still enough to see reality directly. And through that stillness, he discovered a peace untouched by the endless turbulence of craving. That same possibility remains available now, even in the middle of modern life. A person does not need to escape into a forest to begin reclaiming this peace. The path starts wherever one is. In a quiet morning before touching the phone. In a conscious breath taken during a stressful day. In the courage to sit silently for a few moments without reaching for distraction. In choosing presence over endless stimulation. In remembering that life is not a race towards self-completion. Because one day, every ambition will end. Every possession will be left behind. Every identity will dissolve. Every carefully constructed image of self will eventually fade. And when all of that falls away, what remains? The Buddha invites people to discover that answer now, before life forces the question upon them. Beneath the noise of becoming, beneath the restless movement of thought, beneath the endless pressure to perform, there is a stillness already present. A silence untouched by success or failure. A peace not dependent on achievement. The Dhamma does not create this peace. It reveals what was hidden beneath craving all along. Perhaps this is why true rest feels so sacred. Because in moments of deep stillness, even briefly, human beings stop trying to become someone else. The mind no longer races toward the future. The heart no longer fights the present. For one quiet moment, the burden of me grows lighter. And maybe this is where liberation truly begins. Not in extraordinary experiences. Not in spiritual performance. Not in endless striving. But in the simple, courageous act of no longer running away from the present moment. So tonight, perhaps sit quietly for a while. Turn off the noise. Put down the endless demands of becoming. Listen carefully to the silence beneath the world. Feel the breath entering and leaving the body. And for a single moment, allow yourself to rest completely. Not because you have earned it. Not because you finally achieved enough. But because beneath all the craving, all the exhaustion, and all the endless movement of the mind, peace was always waiting here.